Hello and welcome to a very special episode of the OH2 Garage, because in this episode we're going to pay homage to a very special person that was in my life for over 30 years who's just passed away. And I really hope you enjoy this story. Hi, and thanks for watching the OH2 Garage. I hope you're enjoying all the videos and everything we do. This time around I'm going to do something a little bit special. I don't have any car show to present, vehicles to fix up, project cars to give you an update on. Instead, I thought I'd take the opportunity to share the story of a gentleman who's been in my life for 30 years and who has a big impact on me in regards to cars and my love of everything automotive. A gentleman by the name of Gavin, who was my stepfather, and he passed away just this week after a long battle with poor health, and we were all by his side when he peacefully decided to go. And it was a very beautiful and fitting end to an incredible life, and certainly one that had a profound effect on me. So that got me thinking in the days following, what happens, where do the memories go? And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm gonna do a video and put a video together and share with people who he was through a car sense, because there's no point me trying to explain the sort of person he was. Needless to say, on that side of things, he was a really cool guy. He was a really cool guy. Passed away at age 75. He lived through the 60s, he lived through the 70s, he lived through the 80s, the times where things were very different in society, where we didn't have lockdown and we didn't have COVID and those things, and we had incredible cars. And I really want to talk to you about Gavin through his love of cars. And it all kicked off when I was 15 years old, of all things. I was very young. I was living in a place called Ranella in South Australia. My mother had separated from my natural father, and I had two brothers. One was away in the army at that time, my older brother Uncle Mark, and my younger brother Ryan was still at home, but he was obviously a lot younger than me. And my mum started dating again, and to cut a long story short, a gentleman rocked up on the door one day, and he would have been about 6'3", a big full head of hair, as you can imagine, and he was driving a white Ford XF Falcon, column auto, and it had 12 slot rims on it, lowered, bench seat, and it was at the time a very, very cool modern car, and it was a ute, and I'd never been exposed to a ute, so it caught my eye. And this car was his daily driver, and it was lowered, and he would put my mum in it and they would go out on a date. And I thought that was pretty fantastic. A couple of weeks after, he was still on the scene, and he was still around the place, and I took him aside and had a chat to him about cars. And I was 15, and I discovered Street Machine magazine not all that long earlier. Some cousins of mine had come over, and one of them had a VK Blue Meanie. They were both in the military. They were both a lot older. One had a VK Blue Meanie, the other one had a very, very, very rare HDT VK Commodore, I'm going to say Senator, but it wasn't even that. It was something, director of some description, I don't know. I'll try and dig up a photo. And they had actually gotten me into Street Machine magazine at the time. This was in the, I'm going to say, mid-80s. And I was exposed to people like Howard Astle and all those great car builders of the time, the Fitzpatricks. And Gavin was on the scene with my mum, so I decided I needed to make an effort with this guy who was a part of my mum's life. And so I would get Street Machine magazines, which were about $1.50 back then, and I would leave them out, and we would look at them and look at the pictures, and he would talk to me about his cars, and I would talk to him about it. He really helped foster my love of modified cars. My mum at the time had a 1973 HQ Holden, and I lusted after that car, a 202 Trimatic column auto, and sat in the driveway, and she had a little Mitsubishi Lancer that she would drive around and head to work in, but the HQ was sitting there. I think she thought that maybe one day I was going to get a chance to drive it. Anyway, with Gavin, we discussed a lot of car stuff, and it turned out that he had this fantastic story about back when he was a lot younger. He owned a Mini Cooper S, and this Cooper S was twin tanks at the back, and I think he said from memory it was a maroon one. Something reason or other I got that in my mind, it was maroon. But this big hulking huge man was in this tiny little diminutive Mini Cooper S. But he'd look at me and he'd say it was the fastest thing around corners. And he got me to understand and appreciate front-wheel drive cars, and more importantly 4-cylinder cars, which later on would actually give me an opportunity to go and work for the Australian National Drag Racing Association as the sports compact director. So Gavin's influence on me at an early age wasn't all about V8s. You know, you had to understand other cars and other engines and formats. So he told me the story about this Mini Cooper S, and it got stolen. And when it got stolen, it was actually driven to Western Australia or something like that from South Australia, and it was driven literally all over the place, and they'd painted a map of Australia on the bonnet, and the guys that had stolen it were actually keeping a record as to where they'd driven. And eventually, when Gavin got the car back after they were busted by the cops, it was flogged out. He couldn't keep it, and he always, you know, regret the day he missed the opportunity to, you know, get his Cooper S going again and back on the road again. And so yeah, so the Cooper S unfortunately went by the wayside. So now the Cooper S was gone, and because it was stolen and recovered, Gavin had the opportunity to get paid out the insurance money. And so he got the money and went looking for a car. And the next car he bought was a HG Holden Monaro. Now, if my memory serves me correct in the conversations we had, it was a green car. You remember this conversation happened when I was 15 years old and I was getting to know Gavin. So he had a green HG Holden Monaro. Now, I'm going to say it had a 350 motor in it. He used to say it had a 350 motor in it. So I'm not 100% sure if it was a Bathurst Monaro, but for the sake of this story, I'm going to say that's what it was. It was a 350 HG Monaro. But that doesn't sound right, because it would have been a 327. Anyway, cut a long story short, he had the car out in the Glynde corner, which is where he used to live in South Australia, and he was having some tyres put on this car at the time, and he took it into the tyre place, and he was having it serviced. Sorry, that's right, it's all coming back to me. He's having it serviced. He dropped it off at the Glynde corner to have it serviced, and the guy came out to get in the car and take it. Gavin was going to go in and wait in the lounge, and as he took off, Gavin said he did a massive burnout right up the road, flat out up the road, spinning the tyres, smoke pouring off the back of the tyres. And Gavin walked into the service manager's office and said, so that was my Monaro being road tested up the road, and I look forward to getting it back with the full service and a brand new set of tyres, and I won't be paying any money for any of it. And that was really the first time I'd ever heard of anybody, you know, getting money back from a service, or, you know, telling people that they'd done the wrong thing on the car. And it was a real eye-opener for me at the time. And anyway, he got his car back, and he since sold it on, and many cars came and went. And you know, in his time with me, he was had the white XF Ford Falcon, and then he sold the white XF Ford Falcon, and he bought a maroon EA Falcon, which he ended up putting, you know, mag wheels on, and he had the rear Venetian, and he had that lowered. You remember back in the day, this is what people did, and that was a really cool car, because that was a new car in the day. After that, he went and got himself, which I still think is one of the more eye-catching cars of the day. He bought a VS Commodore S-Pack, no, it wasn't S-Pack, Equip. So it was a VS Commodore Equip, and it was silver, and it had the green trim that went around it, like iridescent green trim, and it was a really eye-catching car. But what he also had done to it was he had lowered it, put FE2 suspension on it, and he put 16-inch rims on this car. Now, back in the day, 16-inch rims on a Commodore was unheard of. It was real cutting edge. So, you know, for me, I was sort of 17 years old. I'm looking at it going, oh my God, this car's amazing. And that car, even to this day, in 2021, is still kicking around south of Adelaide with the silver paint and the 16-inch rims, and it still looks as good and as sharp. And that's a good word. It looks sharp. After that, he bought a red Ford Falcon BA on gas. That turned out to be a lemon. The engine blew up with something like about 5,000 Ks, I'm not sure. Had an LPG system that was acting up, burned a hole in the piston, so that was swapped out. He got himself an electric blue blueprint XR6 BA with factory gas. And again, he had that thing lowered, tinted windows, he had all the good bits and pieces and stuff on it. It was a nice car, and that left such an impression on me that I ended up using that car and chose that colour of car to paint the Valiant. That's the colour the Valiant is painted, the Chrysler. After that, he had a really nice Ford Territory that wasn't modified. He was starting to get a bit older by this stage. And as he was starting to get a little bit older, he had to tame things down a bit and decided it was time to, you know, do a bit of caravanning and so forth. So that was a Territory on gas, and it was digital EFI gas. He still knew his stuff. He still knew exactly what to put on the car, so it wasn't a vapor system. After that, picked up a Pajero, very similar to what I'm driving today. From that, he got himself a really nice Jeep Cherokee, really nice Jeep Cherokee, one of the first ones, turbo diesel, all the fruit. I think it was the Kakadu Outback edition, whatever it was, just really nice. And then after that, his health started to decline, and my mum now has a Kia GT Sportage, blah blah, I don't know, whatever it is, they got something like that. But one of the cars, and a couple of the cars that were really interesting, was that Gavin always had a toy on the side. He'd have his mainstream car, but he'd have a toy, and he was always a motorbike rider, so he'd ridden bikes all his life. And I actually, when I first got my license, because of Gavin's influence, nearly got my motorbike license. I was going to get the wet weather gear. I was going to get a road trail bike, like a DR250 Suzuki. Gavin was going to take me to get my license, and I think at one stage I even applied for my motorbike L's, and Gavin was there to help me go and do that, and he was going to teach me about wet weather driving and all that. As it turned out, I didn't end up getting my license, but he always had motorbikes. He had a couple of cruiser bikes which were really good, and he used to get around on the cruisers. He had a really cool three-wheel like scooter thing that was just, you know, funky and amazing. A couple of boats. He had a couple of boats with my mum. Although he always used to say how he was the captain of the sea and he could drive boats, but I distinctly remember going out with him one day and he spent more time throwing up than anybody else, which was kind of funny. And my mum obviously had the HQ, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but a couple of the cars that they had on the side was, they bought a Moke. They bought an 1100 Moke. It was red, was nothing special, and they enjoyed it. They bombed around in this little Moke. And after they got that Moke, they realised that they wanted a different Moke, and they went and got themselves, and this is back in the late 90s, I reckon. It would have to have been the late 90s. It might have been the mid 2000s after we came back from Scotland, I'm not sure. But they bought themselves a very, very rare red Moke Californian with a denim print cover. Now, if you know anything about Moke Californians, the rarest ones are the red ones with the white wheels with the denim cover for the roof. They were like a funk pack back in the day, and they were really super rare. And the one that he had with my mum was mint, and I'm saying mint. If you look at the prices of Mokes on eBay, you don't get one much cheaper than about 40 grand these days. This thing would have been 50, 60 grand. It was that good. It had a 1275 motor in it, back to his Mini days, and it had the SU carbs on it, and extractors and rear exhaust, and it had the 4-speed, and it had the denim print seats, the seats and so forth, and it was just unbelievable, that car. I remember seeing it for the first time and never realizing that a Moke could be that well optioned. It had every option from the factory. It would have been a big dollar car. And so that was the last car that Gavin had. as his, what you would call, toy car before he got into some of his motorbikes. So a little bit earlier in this video, I was telling you about the 1973 Holden HQ sedan my mum had, and it was blue, and it had a white roof, and it had blue interior, and it had a 202 Trimatic column auto, gorgeous car, and she used to call it the Queen of the Road. And when Gavin rocked up and came on the scene, this car was certainly in our family, and it was a very much loved member of our family. Arrived pretty well about when I was born, on the in Australia, in South Australia, in a place called Jeps Cross, and it travelled with our family when we went to Western Australia, and it was been a big part of our life for a long time. And when I got my L plates, I needed to learn in a car, and Gavin was very particular about his cars. He didn't like anybody else driving his cars, so the HQ was there, and it was a very easy car to drive because it was a column auto and it shifted its own gears. So Gavin suggested, I remember saying to Gavin, you know, I really want to get my license. I had a girlfriend at the time. I really want to get my license. I want to get my license. And he's like, slow down, we've got to find the right car, we've got to find the right opportunity. He said, why don't I have a chat to your mum, and why don't you drive the HQ? And I'm like, yeah, let me drive the HQ. Yep, that sounds great. I was just bull at a gate. I wanted to learn. So Gavin actually stepped up and asked my mum if he could teach me to drive in the HQ. Now, Gavin was actually a bus driver, and he had been a bus driver for a long time, so he was really good at picking his spot on the road and how to drive and how to position cars and how to reverse. So he probably was the best person to learn, and he took me aside, and we spent a long time learning to drive. We first drive was in a car park in Old Ranella, which was Cheap Foods Old Ranella, and he taught me how to drive around, and then he taught me how to reverse, and you know, he spent some time teaching me how to reverse trailers on my L plates, which was really good. I got used to using mirrors, and I would say that my driving skills have a direct lineage back to Gavin teaching me how to drive in this 1973 HQ sedan. The car was sold later on and it went in that direction, but I remember afterwards having Gavin in the car with me after I threw my P plates, and you know, even driving in Scotland when he came over to visit me with my mum when Catherine and I lived over in Scotland in Dundee, and Gavin would ride in the passenger seat with me, and he did an interesting style of teaching. He would tell you what to do, and then he'd say, right, I've told you what to do, you now need to do it. If you make a mistake, I'll let you know, but do the best you can. And even later on in Scotland, when we're going through the Highlands and driving up and down through roads through Glencoe and stuff like that, and he would say to me things like, yep, you're doing really well, your driving is really good position on the road, well done. He was always complimentary, and if ever you made a mistake, he would always say, oh, okay, that was a little bit of a boo-boo there, but that's all right, on the next one do this and this. And all you had to do was execute what he said, but he had such a lovely disposition that it wasn't all that hard to learn how to do it correctly. Fast forward now to 2021, and I'm finding myself teaching my son, my 16-year-old son Thomas, how to drive. And Thomas is a really good driver, not a half decent driver. He's a really good driver for his age, and all of the skills I learned from Gavin teaching me, I'm now passing on to Thomas with his driving. And I'll tell you, I think anybody watching this video would feel very comfortable in the passenger seat next to Thomas. He doesn't race the car, he doesn't, you know, put his foot down flat, he doesn't do burnouts and try and take corners hard and rage through corners. He's a very level-headed driver, and it actually goes all the way back to when Gavin taught me, his influence on me. And so I think as I get to the end of this video, I have some reflections on the man who was Gavin and what he did for our family and the influence he had on our family. He was a car guy, and he brought the love of vehicles to our family through an older generation. My mum loved cars, and my dad, my natural dad, he appreciated cars, but he didn't have the passion, and he didn't spark the passion in me like Gavin did with his desire and his fun with cars. So I thought I'd make this video and pay homage to an incredible man who just took the time to share his love of something, and it resonated with a very influential 15-year-old. He guided me on a path where I put my money into cars, I put my focus into cars, I put my career into cars. And if I probably hadn't have found that, who knows where I would have ended up, who knows what path I would have gone on. I wouldn't have travelled the world like I have and enjoyed cars in the UK and in America, and met fantastic people and attended incredible car shows. And I really can draw a direct line back to that time when I first met him, and he walked through the door and he had that beautiful Ford Falcon XFU. So I hope you enjoyed this story of an incredible man, a fantastic influence, and somebody who's never going to be forgotten. Thanks for listening, guys. And if you want to hit like and subscribe, and you want to hear more stories, and you want to have more videos coming your way, please feel free to do that. We're always welcoming and happy to have you on board. We always know where we're going because we remember where we come from. And Gavin, he was an influence on me, and he always will be. And that was the genesis for my journey in cars and love with cars. So wherever he is, whatever he's doing, I will always say thank you to him. Thank you for starting me off.